Star Wars: The New Jedi Order Dark Tide 1 Onslaught is a bit of a mouthful, I would say, but also it's the second book in the New Jedi Order series and the first book of the Dark Tide subseries. The book is written by Michael Stackpole. He was a driving force in Star Wars' novel branch for a few years there, writing 8 books in 4 years before dropping out of the franchise entirely, mostly focusing on his own original character, Corran Horn, a pilot for Rogue Squadron. Then eventually that character turned into a Jedi. Everyone has an OC, that's just kind of how it worked in the extended universe. Dark Tide was originally a trilogy, with the planned entries being Onslaught, Siege, and Rune, but the Siege book would eventually be seen as unneeded and have its plot points divided between Onslaught and Rune, and would end up being cancelled. The story of Dark Tide Onslaught takes place in 25 ABY, shortly before the events of Vector Prime. Since the events of the last book, the Yuuzhan Vong threat has grown, with Dubrillion, Lando's planet from the first book, being taken over, along with some strategic points across the Outer Rim. Han Solo is totally out of the war, not caring much about anything following the death of his best friend Chewbacca, and the shattered illusion that he and his family are totally safe despite death and destruction always happening around them. While Leia is trying to convince the Senatorial Council there's a problem with the Yuuzhan Vong, which they choose to be willfully ignorant of, so she heads off with Jaina and Danny from the first book to try to recruit Outer Rim planets. Anakin Solo, meanwhile, is watching Mara and ensuring that she continues to recover from her ailment, which eventually leads him to facing a group of Yuuzhan Vong fighters alone. And Master Corran is trying to keep the Jedi together, working opposite Kip Duran, who still wants revenge on the Vong, claiming the Jedi have to take the offensive and wipe out the Vong, as Corran and Luke claim the Jedi must act as protectors. Luke and Jason are on a mission together when they sense that the planet of Tatooine is in trouble, heading back to that planet as Corran and Ganner, a Jedi sympathetic to Kip's philosophy who has a change of heart, go as well, with Corran forced to fight and kill a Yuuzhan Vong, Corran being seriously injured in the process. Shadao Shai, a Vong commander, is notified of what Corran did and seeks revenge, since the Vong he killed were his kin. And this is where the novel ends, leading directly into Dark Tide Part 2. Luke Skywalker and Jason Solo head off on a reconnaissance mission, with Luke trying to mentor his nephew, who more or less wants to break off and explore the Force independent of the Jedi Order, flirting with the idea of dropping the violence altogether, and more or less exploring and experimenting with the Force in a hands-off way. This obviously doesn't really seem possible at this given time, given the current events with the Yuuzhan Vong War. Luke feels like shit, since in theory he supports the idea, but knows it isn't possible at that time. Jason is also briefly held hostage and feels the embrace of pain, which sucks for him, but Luke catches up to him pretty quickly and saves him, of course. Mara is still very sick, and Anakin is entrusted by Luke to protect her on Dantooine, much to the dismay of Mara, who doesn't want to be babied by her husband. As you may suspect, the Vong eventually catch up with them, and Anakin fights them off, while also bonding with Mara, since Mara helps tutor him in some Force tactics he didn't know. Mara's illness is still progressing, which is hard for her, and Anakin proves to be the strongest hand-to-hand warrior of the Solo kids, in many ways reflecting his grandfather, Anakin Skywalker, which is also kind of scary for him, given Anakin Skywalker's fate later on. Ganner starts this book arrogant, wanting to bring the fight to the Yuuzhan Vong, but changes his tone, working with Corran to save some scientists, with Ganner injured during the assault, and later Corran fighting hand-to-hand with Nira Shai and Draini Shai, a couple of Commander Shadao Shai's kin, who are both struck down by Corran, leading to Shadai wanting Corran dead, hoping to duel the Jedi. This comes into play in the next novel. Corran himself is gravely wounded at the end of the novel, and Ganner, turning from an arrogant kind of asshole at the start of the novel, coming around to the thinking of the rest of the Jedi. This comes into play down the line several books from now in Star by Star, where he's a pretty important character, and that's an integral novel, which we'll eventually talk about, but it'll be a bit. Those are kind of the big players in this book, though it's worth noting the next book really plays up Corran Horn's importance even more than this book did. Leia has a subplot with Danny Quee basically looking for Republic support. Kip is reforming his dozen into something of a Yuuzhan Vong kill squad, something that is unsanctioned by Luke Skywalker and kind of to his dismay. Han briefly appears, basically as a mess of a man following Chewbacca's death. He takes a few books off from being a lead cast member, though he has his own duology through Agents of Chaos coming up. Again, we'll look at that soon. Lando is pretty much back to square one following the Vong attacks on Dubrillion, and Janus tries out and joins Rogue Squadron. These characters aren't really attached to the bones of the story, so to speak, but all these plot points are kind of important to follow as we progress through the series, so when necessary, I'm going to kind of give short character arcs, even if they're not necessarily the main characters of the novel. Dark Tide Onslaught is sort of a procedural in some ways. There is some emotion, but a lot of analysis of the threat of the Yuuzhan Vong and fighting said threat. You look at something like Agents of Chaos's duology after this, and it's almost night and day how different the two series are. Not that this is a bad thing, but the idea of this novel is to show basically how fucking screwed Luke and company are given the predicament with the Yuuzhan Vong invaders. It is a little dark as a result, but I think Michael Stackpole was more interested in setting up the larger threat than the human emotion. And this is kind of a theme in the new Jedi Order books. No two books are the same, and I kind of see them in two categories, the major plot pushers and the ones that are kind of character studies. I also think the second novel in the duology has a bit more spirit behind it, with Corran Horn being really important. And that isn't really to talk down this book, since a lot of this is important context, but that one adds a lot more to Corran Horn and his friend Elego Zakla, who are the heart of that book, while this book is more the broad strokes of the conflict. I don't think the pacing is good in this book. With that said, Vector Prime felt very much in the spirit of Star Wars while also being something new and unique. This book divides our character and runs the narrative a bit thin. Lots of shit is happening across a lot of characters. This isn't really uncommon in the new Jedi Order or Star Wars novels in general. Even recently with the High Republic books, those are really hard to follow unless you read them back to back or have looked into the characters. And I like that future novels go more into a character study angle in this series. This is kind of the Galactic Update novel, so to speak. This one is very much designed to put pieces in place for the future character studies and other upcoming parts of this larger event. As a result, I didn't find this as satisfying as the other novels, though I think it has some good lore and has some moments that put in some really good work as well. I will by no means call it bad, but it's certainly not the best by any means either. Of course, upon completing Onslaught, Michael Stackpole's more focused follow-up, Dark Tide Rune, would follow shortly behind.